Hello, everybody, and welcome to the Tip of the Ice-Burgh podcast, your home for Pittsburgh Penguins news and analysis. You can find us on YouTube at Tip of the Ice-Burgh. Make sure you make sure you subscribe to our channel and tell all your friends, or you can catch us anywhere you get your podcast from. I'm your host, Nick Belsky, joined as always by Nick Horwat, and man, the Penguins are just giving us the holiday cheer as this last 2-week stretch has continued to get better and better and better. We'll continue to talk about their impressive run and whether or not it kind of changes the perspective on what this team could be by the end of the season. And then there was one very major lineup change on Saturday night leading into the Penguins' massive victory over the Toronto Maple Leafs. We'll talk about that and why it is something that has been a long time coming, at least for the player that was sent down in the lineup. And then we'll close things out with a little bit of this week in Penguins history, looking at the head coach of the Pittsburgh Penguins. Little spoiler alert there, but we'll get this started on the Tip of the Ice-Burgh. Horwat, the book has been clear on the Penguins all season long, at least up until the last couple of weeks. They were great against bad teams, 6-2-2 against teams below 500, and they were just plain awful against good teams, 1-10-2 against teams above 500 up until this last stretch. Now they've won 5 of their last 6, all of them against teams that are above that Mendoza line at 500. Has this run salvaged the Penguins season?
It's so tough to say if this stretch here has saved anything for the Penguins this season because of how bad they looked to start the year, because of the last 2 years of brutal endings to the season overall. It's tough to say that this has salvaged anything, especially with so much hockey left to be played.
Yeah.
A lot can happen. I mean, we are all well aware that they are, quote unquote, sniffing a playoff spot. And, the Rangers are quickly falling out of pace. The Capitals seem to be eating the world alive. The Devils are doing the same. But if the door is opening up for the Penguins, I mean, they're going to have to take advantage. But as of right now, it's tough to say that this is saving it just because there's so much hockey and past and just recent memory has not boded well for them. I don't know if it's saved it. It's certainly a good stretch for the time being. I'd have a hard time saying that the season is saved and going forward, we should look at this team as a playoff team. Impress me once the calendar flips, and then maybe we'll have a different discussion. But for now, I mean, it's just a good little stretch that every team gets every so often. It's a matter of maintaining it. It's up to them now.
Yeah, it is what was needed, though, because the beginning of the season, as you mentioned, was absolutely horrendous. And that's where I think the word salvage is better than the word save, because I think save makes it seem like, oh, it's fixed. All is well. They're in a good position. They're still in the back seat right now. Like, they've won 5 of 6. They're playing some good hockey. In fact, Saturday's performance against the Toronto Maple Leafs was probably the best game that they have played all season long. And it looks like they're doing it in sustainable ways, right? They're not giving up a ton of chances and just getting saved by their netminder. Now, Tristan Jarry had another really solid performance, but I think defensively they were much better. Offensively, they were pretty good. They were getting contributions from the power play. They were getting contributions from a lot of different players. So I liked what I saw on Saturday, and generally I've liked what I've seen over the last week or so when they've won 5 of the 6, but salvaged is much better because they were in a massive hole. Now, one that they put themselves into. And I think this stretch has kind of dug them out of that and brought them to even ground. Now, the games in hand are not totally erased, but the picture is looking a little bit more clear for the Penguins, right? There's still only one team, the New Jersey Devils, that have played more games than the Penguins, but it's not 3 or 4 on everybody in the Eastern Conference. It's more like 1 or 2. And then, of course, there's the Tampa Bay Lightning, who still somehow have like 5 games in hand on the Penguins. But a lot of those games in hand are starting to get erased. If the Penguins can kind of keep pace with what they're doing up until the Christmas break, you'd have to imagine that they would sit in a much better position. But I think it's salvaged. I think you look at them and you're saying, okay, now you're back to even ground. And it took 5 out of 6 wins against winning teams to get there, but you have to be able to follow it up because, as you mentioned, Horvat, there's a lot of season left to go for the Pittsburgh Penguins. And while it's been great for the last week and a half, they got to do it for another 3 or 4 months to make sure that they are close to kind of making any noise at all this season.
Yeah, no kidding. Especially these next 2 weeks as I pull their schedule up leading up to Christmas. I mean, there's some tough games. They have Colorado tonight, which will not be an easy test, no matter who's in goal for them.
Yeah.
It won't be an easy test because of the skaters that they have. Montreal, I mean, listen, I think they're still the worst team in the East.
Yeah.
But Patrick Laine is lighting the world on fire. And if I'm not mistaken, they haven't lost with him yet. They beat Anaheim in a shootout last night. So that's a start. Ottawa, I mean, a lot of noise around Ottawa. I think they're all putting it behind them. So they're going to be at least by the 14th, they'll probably try and come out with some strong performances in the next couple of weeks for themselves. LA, that's tough.
Yeah.
At Nashville. Now, again, great team on paper. Boy, that's a game the Penguins need to win.
Yeah.
That just is. And then they're at New Jersey and back home against Philadelphia on the day before Christmas. It's a stretch of you got some really talented teams in there and you've got some slackers.
Yeah.
It'll be up to the Penguins to not be part of the slackers category themselves.
Yeah, they've been pretty good, like we mentioned at the top of the show, against teams that are below 500, 6-2-2 on the season. For this stretch, it's something we looked at going into it saying, man, it's been bad. It could get worse because they're going to play all these teams. Well, they've overperformed against these really solid teams, and that run kind of concludes tonight with the exception of New Jersey and LA, who were placed kind of sparingly in that schedule leading up to Christmas. But you have those other games against Philly, against Montreal, against Ottawa. Those are teams that you need to, if you want to separate yourself from this kind of mediocre pack in the Eastern Conference, you have to take care of business against those teams. So I think that's going to be very interesting as we move forward here because they've done so well against good teams. Are they going to let their foot off the pedal whenever they go up against the lesser opponent? That's what remains to be seen. Now, before we move over to talk about that lineup change that honestly I was a little wary about, but the early returns are good. We'll talk about that in a minute. I'll ask you this, Horwat. Which bucket do you place the Pittsburgh Penguins in right now? Are they a playoff team in your eyes? Are they a bubble playoff team, which is, first team, second team out, or one of the wild cards? Or do you think they're just a lottery team and they're just overperforming over this last week and a half?
Can there be another bucket that is just genuinely in the middle between a wild card team and a bubble team? There's that weird mediocre section of teams sometimes. It's usually like a team or two
bubble
big,
playoff team.
but right below it, but also not bad enough to be lottery. It's like that sixth or seventh, right where they were last year, essentially. That sixth or seventh worst team in the league, that eighth or ninth, whatever the lottery goes to. I think it's 10 and I'm stupid. That like 11th worst team in the league. You're not a bubble team. You're not even close to being a bubble team, but also you missed the lottery. It's a tough bucket to be in, but that's the way I see them right now. I mean, because I'm not buying into this stretch just yet.
Mm-hmm.
I mean, like it's fun beating really good teams. It's fun beating Toronto. It's fun. The Rangers would have been fun. That would have been very fun.
Yeah.
But they need to do that on a regular basis.
Mm-hmm.
But at the same time, they're winning too much to be a lottery team. It helps that there's 4 points, 2 whole wins separating the second wild card spot and dead last in the East.
Mm-hmm.
It helps that that's all it is right now. So maybe you could say they're a bubble playoff team, but I still am not buying in quite yet. But also they're winning too much to be a lottery team.
Well, that's just over the last week or so. I mean, that's just the last half a dozen games. But the way I see them is they are back to where they started. They are a bubble playoff team because I don't think they've ever been, at least this season, they have never been firmly a playoff team. I mean, straight from the jump, they lost 6-0 to the New York Rangers on home ice. I think for most of this season, they've been performing and they've been sitting in the bucket of a firm lottery team. But I think that their recent performance has kind of matched with, as you mentioned there, the mediocrity of the Eastern Conference has bumped them back up to where they were to start the year, which is, hey, you're a bubble playoff team that is probably going to be right where you were last year, right where you were 2 years ago, finishing in a battle in the dogfight in the last week or two of the season to try to climb into the playoffs. And then obviously, once you get into there, you change the conversation based on how you've been performing, yada, yada, yada. But I think that's where they're at. I think they're back at a bubble playoff team. They're going to have to do some incredible things for me to consider them a bona fide playoff team this year. But I do think that right now they've kind of separated themselves from a lottery team with the way that they've been performing. Now, again, points wise, all it takes is one bad week and all of a sudden they could be sitting there in the basement again. But I think performance wise, especially when you consider who they've gone up against in this last week and a half, 2 week stretch, I think that they're showing that they are a step above that lottery bubble. And I think they're at the actual playoff bubble, which is, again, something that changes very rapidly, especially this year because there's been so much parity in the league. But I think right now I would say that they have kind of climbed their way out of that lottery conversation back into, hey, maybe if we continue this pace, we can climb into a playoff spot. Or maybe if we just fall apart, we'll just go back down. But I think they're right now in that middle ground where it can go either way.
The mushy middle, I believe, is what it's being called.
Yeah, by a lot of people. And that's exactly where the Penguins sit.
Yeah, it's just tough for me to label them as any sort of playoff team, even a bubble team at this time.
Yeah. I mean, that's fair. That's 100% fair. It's show me more, right? That's always what you like to talk about. You're like, hey, show me deals, show me contracts. Now it's, hey, show me month. It's the holiday season. They've been playing well. They've been getting everybody's spirits up. Don't crush them. Don't crush them before the holidays. That's what we're looking for out of the Pittsburgh Penguins. One way that they could continue to keep the spirits up is the performance of one Owen Pickering, a guy that, listen, I'll eat crow on this. At the start of the season, several people had asked, whether it be on the live streams, whether it be on our social channels at Ice-Burgh Podcast, hey, do you think Owen Pickering is close to NHL ready? Are we going to see him this year? And I said, it doesn't feel like what we saw in preseason that he's NHL ready. Match that with the fact that he had never played professionally. You thought, okay, maybe this 20-year-old's still a little further off. He's been impressive through 8 games played of his NHL career. And now, as of this Saturday, he's been promoted to the Penguins' top defense pairing alongside Kris Letang. Grzelcyk needed to be moved down. And I think that kind of expedited this process of putting Owen Pickering in this spot. We talked last week about 2 roster moves the Penguins needed to make. Matt Nieto needed to come out of the lineup, which he was taken out of the lineup immediately after. And then Matt Grzelcyk needed to be moved down. That didn't happen immediately, but a very poor performance against the New York Rangers helped move that needle over the finish line for Mike Sullivan. So Owen Pickering goes up. Him and Letang combined for a very impressive performance against the Toronto Maple Leafs. 14 minutes of 5-on-5 ice time for that pairing. 7-3 was the shots on goal advantage in favor of the Penguins. 74% of the expected goals for. Scoring chances were 8-5 in favor of the Penguins, and goals were 1-0 in favor of the Penguins. Owen Pickering finished Saturday with a career-high 18 minutes and 21 seconds of ice time. Horwat, what were your thoughts on the Penguins going with the rookie up at the top of the lineup?
I was a little surprised by it, but also, like we kind of discussed, they're running out of choices. They're running out of options, and if it means giving him that sort of chance with Kris Letang, if it means giving Owen Pickering that sort of runway, then by all means. Like I said, I'm not necessarily buying into him being a regular NHLer yet either, but I'll tell you what, I mean, you ride the hot hand as long as you can. Maybe he has a short leash, but as of right now, he's still worthy of the positioning he's getting. And in a 1-game sample size, but still in any sort of role, in any sort of situation, playing on the top line and performing well, 18 minutes, that's impressive stuff, especially for, like we said, I think he's 20.
Mm-hmm.
Especially for a defenseman, faster than expected, but for the time being, you ride that hot hand until he can no longer cut it. I mean, maybe this is another P.O. Joseph situation, but the thing about that is we really liked what P.O. Joseph brought to the table for most of his tenure here.
Yeah.
So it's a good problem to have, the fact that Owen Pickering is impressing this early on.
Yeah, and he's I won't want to say he's the complete package, because it's not like he's going to come up and be a Cale Makar, Adam Fox, like immediately one of the best in the league, but he's a guy that can really mold into different roles, right? He's 6'5", 200. So he's got the body and he uses it. Like, that's the thing. We talked a lot last year about Ryan Graves. He's a towering human, but he doesn't always use it to the best of his ability. Owen Pickering at the age of 20 is showing signs that he knows how to utilize his size and his strength to be able to kind of get the advantage in the defensive zone. Not only that, he is very, very talented with the puck on his stick. He scored 1 goal last week, should have scored a second one, was so close to getting a second one at MSG, rang it off the post as solidly as you possibly can. I've really liked watching Owen Pickering, and this is the thing. Penguins fans have been clamoring to get young talent in here, and not all the time has there been young talent to bring up and watch flourish. Owen Pickering has a lot of talent and has taken so many strides between the last couple of years to get to this point where you watch him and it's impressive. It is impressive. Now, again, is it something where it's sustainable for him to automatically start playing 18, 20, 22 minutes a night every single night at the age of 20? That worries me a little bit, but listen, until proven wrong, like you said, ride the hot hand, because this kid hasn't been making those rookie errors all that often. And if he's going to continue to play the way that he's playing, shoot, let him go, because right now, Kris Letang, listen, he had a really good game. He's been playing better over the last couple of weeks, but the last couple of seasons, since Brian Dumoulin left, he hasn't had a consistent defense partner. Him and Erik Karlsson have been passing Marcus Pettersson back and forth like a rag doll. So somebody needs to be able to step up on that left side. If it's Owen Pickering, that is the best case scenario for the Penguins, because that is an option for the future, especially whenever the future for Marcus Pettersson in Pittsburgh is very up in the air. So I love the fact that Owen Pickering got the opportunity. I love the fact that he took it and ran with it in the first game, and I'm excited to see him get more opportunities, because in practice yesterday, he was still up there. So you'd have to imagine that he's going to be sitting there tonight against the Colorado Avalanche.
And that'll be a test. That will be a test. Whether he's going up against Cale Makar, Nathan MacKinnon, it's going to be a test. And it was a jump. If you look at that ice time for him, I mean, he was 13, 12, 13, 11, 12, 18. It was a jump. I mean, his second game, he had 17 and a half. But that was one time, and he had 13 in his debut. So, he's been, I mean, I get he's playing defense, but that's already quite a few minutes for your first, stint in the NHL. Mm-hmm. It's already a good amount of ice time for a 20-year-old defenseman. And now that he's gotten that 18 on the first line, it'll be big to see him continue that. Again, it's another tough test. I mean, he did well against, we say that, he's got a tough test in Colorado, as if he didn't play on the first line against Toronto.
Yeah.
Yeah, and he's impressed. You can't take him off while he's still doing well. Mm-hmm. Again, this is the kind of situation you just leave him on a short leash. If you find the episode where we discuss this with P.O. Joseph, just copy and paste, I bet. Just the same thing. Just leave him up there while he's doing good. If things start to falter, don't be afraid to, you're not going to ruin his progression as an NHL or as a hockey player. You're just going to help him out a little bit. If things start to falter a bit, you scoot him down, maybe you send him back, you rehash this later.
Yeah. Now, the result of Owen Pickering moving up is Matt Grzelcyk moving down and moving to his off wing to be alongside Ryan Graves. That is a pairing that, even if you didn't watch the game on Saturday, I'm assuming you could tell how that went in its first one. Again, it is one game. It is the first time all season that Matt Grzelcyk has played a full game on his off wing, and it's the first time that Ryan Graves has gotten into a game in some time. That pairing at 5-on-5, 10 minutes of ice time, 3-3 shots on goal, 7-6 scoring chances in favor of the Penguins, 0-0 in goals, which isn't awful, but 29% of the expected goals for. That's a number that's gonna need to increase, because if not, then, I mean, I don't know what else you do. You're gonna have to bench one of them, and as of right now, we've seen that Ryan Graves has been getting the healthy scratches more than Matt Grzelcyk, but to me, that is a ticking time bomb of a defense pairing.
Oh, you said it. Maybe it was, you start to try and find the positives as to why it was put together like this. Maybe it was because it was a back-to-back situation, and You're going to give some of the young guys some rest if you have the ability to give guys rest, especially when you have, say what you want about their skill level. They are making NHL money. Ryan Graves and Matt Grzelcyk, that
Oh,
is.
significant NHL money.
Yeah, so maybe when you have those NHL options, you have the opportunity to, hey, we have the options. They're not tired after a game in New York, who
Yeah.
against a Rangers team who needed to show something, and they did. Maybe the Penguins just took advantage of their situation and went, we have two other NHL defensemen.
Yeah.
Throw them in. It's just one game. They don't have another back-to-back, at least until Christmas. They play every other day, but there's no back-to-back situations. Maybe we see a little bit more of Ryan Graves and Matt Grzelcyk in the press box. Again, I'm just trying to speak into positives.
Yeah.
But
I mean, and here's the thing too. Ryan Shea did not have himself a good game in New York. Like
could be that too.
he hadn't played poorly over this stretch. He'd been playing better than he did early in the season, but that game on Friday was a clear indication of, okay, I think he needs a factory reset here. Let him sit on Saturday. And Ryan Graves is in a similar boat, right? It's not like he's been playing above and beyond what you expect, but he has been better than last year. Low bar, I know, but he's been better than last year. So give him an opportunity to get back into the lineup. And we knew Grzelcyk wasn't going to go from the first pairing to out of the lineup. So he bumps down, which I think is the first sign of, hey, Mike Sullivan's finally growing tired of how many opportunities can we give Matt Grzelcyk. But I also think it's partially because they didn't have anybody to put there, right? They weren't going to put. Here were your options. Ryan Shea, who was playing better, but still playing at probably a slightly below NHL average level. Ryan Graves, again, are you ready to pull that trigger and pull that lever to try to see if he's ready again for top 4 minutes? Or Owen Pickering, who had been steadily increasing as his young NHL career was starting to get off on the right foot. So they finally got to the point where they said, you know what? I think Pickering can handle that increased workload, matched with the fact that Matt Grzelcyk looked absolutely horrendous in New York on Friday, and they finally pulled the lever on that. But Grzelcyk Graves is not something I'm interested in seeing over a long period of time. That's for sure.
No, not at all. Especially if it's Grzelcyk playing on his off wing. I get the Penguins have done a lot of that in the last couple seasons. It's just not something that seems feasible for the long term. I mean, I get that last season they kind of had no choice. They only had two right shot defensemen. The whole organization, it felt like. But now you have at least an extra option. You have an extra face who might be able to carry a load there. It's hopefully it was just temporary. Maybe it was just that back-to-back and the fact that Ryan Shea had a poor performance. Moving forward, maybe there is some bit more consistency out of the defensive lineup, because it's been an ever-changing revolving door of names everywhere in the lineup, up and down, in and out, since going back to last year.
Yeah. It's been something that, again, Mike Sullivan doesn't change much, but he's been much more open about changing the lineup around than he used to be. Like, if you remember a couple of years ago, the lineup was the lineup and it wasn't changing. I mean, need I remind everybody of Jeff Carter in 2022, right? He was not moving from the third line center position, even though he was playing. He was much better off his fourth line right wing, which we saw the following year, and he performed better, and he scored 10 plus goals in a fourth line role. So Sullivan's been changing a lot around. They got the win on Saturday. They played really well, so I wouldn't be surprised if we saw that lineup maintain and stay the same against Colorado later tonight. Let's finish off this episode, speaking of Mike Sullivan, with a brief look at this week in Penguins history. December 12th, 2015, the Penguins officially name Mike Sullivan as the head coach of the NHL squad. 9 years later, he just coached in his 700th regular season game with the Pittsburgh Penguins. He started his tenure with 9 consecutive playoff series wins, which means, yes, 2 Stanley Cup victories, but hasn't won a playoff series since. He's 0-5 in the playoffs since that 2018 win against the Philadelphia Flyers. 2 consecutive missed postseasons, obviously, are hanging over the head of Sullivan and the Penguins organization. Horwat, I want to ask you this. What is one word to describe Mike Sullivan's tenure as Penguins head coach to this point?
Oh, see, one word is tough.
And you can't say long, because we all know that one.
It would have to be something along the lines of like a roller coaster ride. I
Mm-hmm.
mean, there's been the obvious successes, and it started off immediately with great successes and just hasn't been the same since. I mean, the failures have outweighed the successes, so maybe some people would come up with some negative words. I just need something that's bare neutral, and quite honestly, that might even be the word, just neutral. Um, you thank him forever and ever, amen, for 2 straight cups, for some history being made there.
Mm-hmm.
You thank him for, generally good coaching, even in some of the poor outcomes of the seasons in terms
Mm-hmm.
of playoff losses. I mean, it was only up until the last 3 years where you've had a healthy Crosby and Malkin. And now before then it was, well, you have to deal with one of them being out. You have to deal with both of them being out,
Mm-hmm.
rarely, but sometimes. And there were genuine years, even if they lost in the first round of the playoffs, that you look at Mike Sullivan's season and go, he should be up for the Jack Adams, essentially. Now, he never got that opportunity, and maybe that's for the better, but um, I would say overall his tenure's been neutral because you have those great successes, but these last couple of years have been brutal. They've
Mm-hmm.
been tough, and I mean, not too many coaches can go 3 years on the hot seat, allegedly, uh, and still be considered a top coach in the NHL. He's certainly one of them. If he gets fired, someone will do what St. Louis did. They'll fire
Yeah.
their coach for him. So, I mean, the Penguins are in a tough spot when it comes to Sullivan's status
Mm-hmm.
in terms of where he is in the team, but they believe he's going to be the right guy. I I don't know where I stand on anymore, but his tenure has been truly neutral, I
Yeah.
guess.
The word that comes to mind for me is volatile.
That's the one.
Yeah, I mean, that is the highest of highs, 2 Stanley Cups, and I get that they were early. But, you mentioned, the successes, or sorry, the failures outweigh the successes. I think when you win 2 Stanley Cups in 9 years, most organizations will take that. Like, I understand that they were both in the first 2 years, and since then, it's been a fall off. I mentioned 5 consecutive playoff series losses, also 2 consecutive missed postseasons. That is a lot to take in a row, but outside of the highest highs, I think one of the biggest knocks on him is that I think there was a couple years where he squandered really great teams, but it wasn't his fault, right? 2021, I thought that team was very good, but Tristan Jarry had the worst goaltending performance in a playoff series that we've seen potentially in Penguins history. And that's for an organization that watched Marc-Andre Fleury. Love him. If you've listened to the show, you know we love him. But in the playoffs in the early 2010s, he was bad. He was awful. And yet, Jarry was worse in 2021 against the Islanders. And then 2022, which was an absolute crapshoot with Louis Domingue, Casey DeSmith, and a hobbled Tristan Jarry in a Game 7 against the New York Rangers. You squander that 3-1 series lead. Again, I don't put that on coaching as much as I put that on goaltending, because at that time of the year, that's what it was. But those were really good teams that could have gone on runs. Now, 2020, weird situation. You probably still shouldn't have lost to the Montreal Canadiens in that bubble playoffs. But I think now you're seeing a kind of a different phase of this Penguins organization under Sullivan's tenure, because now he's not coaching tremendous teams. He's coaching a team that has aging superstars, but he's trying to get the most out of the rest of the roster. A roster that is an amalgamation of veterans trying to fix their career, and young kids trying to make it. And I think that is going to be a different task for Sullivan that we're going to have to grade on kind of a different scale, because to this point in his tenure, up until I'd say 2022 was the end of it, because that's when Ron Hextall burnt it to the ground unintentionally. Up until that point, it was, what can you get out of these really good players? Can you galvanize that unit and make them go towards the promised land like you did earlier in your career? Now we're looking at this as, your roster is not one of the best in the NHL. In fact, it's probably not one of the top 15 in the NHL. Can you get the most out of it? Can you get the most out of Philip Tomasino like he has in his first couple of weeks? Can you get the most out of a 20-year-old in Owen Pickering? Can you get the most out of Tristan Jarry, whose confidence was shot coming into this year? Can you fix that? Can you get him to kind of better himself? Can you get the most out of a 38-year-old Evgeny Malkin, a 37-year-old Sidney Crosby, a 38-year-old Kris Letang, and an Erik Karlsson who couldn't turn to his right 10 years ago, and now it's just awful? Can you get the most out of that? I think it's going to be interesting, but it certainly goes to the volatility, because he's essentially had 3 different phases, 3 different eras, if you will. Great performance with a great team, underachieving performance with a good team, and now he has a poor team. What can he get out of them? So it's different challenges for a head coach, something that you don't often get the opportunity to see a head coach go through, because the shelf life is never 9 years. So I think it's really interesting as we approach that anniversary, that he's looking at an entirely different task that he had when he was initially brought up from Wilkes-Barre 9 years ago.
It is. It's it's almost like we're looking at a team in transition, but
I mean, it is.
it
100%.
is. It is. It's hard to say it's a team in transition whenever the main pieces are the ones that have been here. The
Yeah.
main focal points are Sidney Crosby, Evgeny Malkin, Kris Letang. They've been here. Erik Karlsson is a quote-unquote main focal point, if you will. And obviously he's new here, but signals the transition a little bit more, too.
Mm-hmm.
The win now while building for the future. It wasn't an easy job for Kyle Dubas, and it certainly is not easy for Mike Sullivan either. He's got a tough team, a tough roster of players to deal with here. But, I mean, like we also just discussed, if they can find some consistency, if they can work their way through this poor start and maybe become a playoff team, maybe solidify themselves as a playoff team, suddenly you're having that discussion again of just how good of a coach is Mike Sullivan.
Mm-hmm.
And it's definitely much improved from what a lot of people thought last year, thought the year before, and thought definitely at the beginning of this year.
Mm-hmm.
It'll be fascinating to see how that works out. But I'd say for now, Mike Sullivan is, without doubt, one of the best coaches in the league. He's just been given a tough roster to deal with.
Mm-hmm.
And certainly has the history of winning. You're right. A lot of teams would take 2 cups in 9 years, even if they were front loaded.
Mm-hmm.
I mean, heck, the Rangers, I know the Rangers are falling out of contention. I mentioned them a lot. It's kind of tough or hard to think that they've had 1 Stanley Cup championship since 1940.
Yeah.
40. And they've had good teams. They've had some awful teams too, but they've had some really good teams, especially recently. But, I mean, Mike Sullivan's going to be a good coach no matter where he is. It's a matter of the lineup he has in front of him. And if they can turn this around, we'll see how far the Jack Adams conversation can go.
Yeah, now let me close out this conversation with this, and close out the episode with this question. As of right now, we are 300 and next year's not a leap year, right? No, this year was 367 days away from what would be the 10-year anniversary of his hiring. Do you think he makes it to the decade mark as Penguins head coach?
Yeah, I think so. I think they at least, I mean, the Penguins have already said quite a bit. They believe in Mike Sullivan. They think he's the right coach for this year, next year, for the rebuild, for the retool, the whatever.
Mm-hmm.
And if Josh Yohe's, I believe it was Josh Yohe that said it, this Penguins organization is not putting any of the blame of this season on him, then that would just signify that, yeah, they're gonna try and keep him around. Mm-hmm. If the wheels do fall off, then that is just a change that needs to happen.
Yeah.
But as of right now, those wheels aren't falling off. In fact, they seem to be getting screwed back on a bit. So we'll see. I'd say for now, tentatively, yeah, he makes it. Mm-hmm. Ask me again in a month. Ask me, like, this could be a monthly question.
Oh, yeah. That's why I prefaced it with as of right now.
Yeah.
But yeah, I agree with you. I think as of right now, especially when you're coming off of 5 wins in 6 games, it's hard to imagine that the wheels are going to fall off far enough, considering we watched them fall off pretty hard through October, through November. And there weren't even whispers of, the Penguins aren't really happy with the job Sullivan is doing as head coach, matched with the fact that, we just mentioned the roster's in flux. The job in front of him is much harder now than it was before. Before it was, hey, you got a great roster, make them work. Now it's, you got a lot of question marks. Can you start to find answers to that? Can you kind of put the puzzle together? Can you figure it all out? And right now, Blake Lizotte third line center is working pretty well. Phil Tomasino as a second liner was working pretty well. I'm glad Jesse Puljujärvi, even though it was due to Tomasino coming out of the lineup, I'm glad Jesse Puljujärvi got back on the ice. I'd like to see more of that. So he's starting to turn over these cards in a way that's working out for the Penguins. If he continues to do that, he's just going to buy himself more grace. And he is a head coach that we have talked about, has been given more grace than any coach we can think of in the history, or at least in recent history of the National Hockey League. So I agree. Right now, I think he does make it to that 10-year mark. Beyond that, it's going to be hard to project out because right now, it's hard to project anything for the future of the Pittsburgh Penguins. But that's going to do it for this episode of the Tip of the Iceberg. Thank you guys so much for tuning into this one. Remember, you can find us on YouTube at Tip of the Iceberg. Make sure you like, share, subscribe, all that fun stuff. Or you can catch us anywhere you get your podcast from. We'll see you guys next time.